Hi, I'm Candice Bergen. Welcome to Exhale. Tonight, we'll take an in-depth look at the most complex creature on the planet, your mother. No matter how old you are, no one can make you feel loved, needed, angry, and resentful quite like Mom. And it just takes one phone call. I'll be talking about mothers with psychotherapist Alice Faye Cleese, who has just written a book on the subject. We'll be joined by her husband, former Monty Python member John Cleese, who will tell us about his own mom and why he spent so much of his career dressing up like her. So stay tuned, don't make me call your father, and don't forget to exhale.
I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I don't know enough about you. Just when I think you're mine, you try different line. Baby, what can I do? I read the latest news, no buttons on my shoes. Baby, I'm confused about you. You've got me in a spin, and what a spin I'm in, 'cause I don't know enough about you.
Alice Faye Cleese is a noted psychotherapist and the author of the new book, How to Manage Your Mother. Alice, I'm so happy to meet you. We have so many friends in common, and I've heard uncannily good things about you. So, not to put any pressure on you, this is such an interesting, accessible, moving book. We'll just clear up that because of the title, which is How to Manage Your Mother, you come to praise or even-handedly appreciate mothers rather than to bury them.
Well, Candice, it's really an ironic title. I mean, I wanted people to really think about their mothers as an adult in a different way. We tend to want our mother to just be mommy, even as an adult. And our mother's a whole object. I mean, you know, you would know. I mean, you're a professional, you're a sister maybe, or you may have been a lover or a mistress. You know, there's a lot of things that mothers are that we as adult children perhaps would rather not think about.
Yes, I was very interested in the part of your book about secrets, dark secrets, and mother's secrets was very interesting. But why moms? Why is the adult mother-adult child relationship so loaded? Because it's unbelievably charged.
Well, it's the first relationship you have in life, even if your mother died or she gave you away. So that's part of it. But I've been in psychotherapy for 30 years, and what I noticed on the couch, people would separate their parents, which I found very interesting. So, and they would never blame the parents. They would say my mother, my father. And mothers seemed to take more precedence. And I don't know about you, but when I want to buy a new pair of shoes, I start looking at everybody's shoes. And I got really interested in this. And because my husband is John Cleese, I was around a lot of people who told funny stories about mothers. And originally I thought I would write about humor. But as I went out to cocktail parties or dinner parties or wherever, it was like if you just touched people below the heart, there's this button. And they had these stories. They were like fairy tales, you know, once upon a time I had a mother, but, and unfortunately they weren't all very funny.
Do you find that that creative, artistic people have stories that are darker, more complicated than most, or that they're more forthcoming about them?
What an interesting question. Actually not. Although this has a lot of celebrities in it, I became obsessed. I mean, I interviewed, you know, if I were on a set or if I were in a taxi, and one day one of the chauffeurs said to me, "Are you interviewing me?" I said, "Yes." One of the guys was driving me to the airport in New York, and I started talking to him. And he had been adopted by his aunt and uncle as a baby. And when he grew up, he said, "I'd really like to meet my mother." And they said, "Well, honey, we don't know where she might be," but they gave him the town, the little village where she was from. He went there and he knocked on the door, and no one came. And the lady next door said, "Who are you looking for?" And he said, "Emma so-and-so." She said, "Oh, she moved about 10 years ago, but I know what village she went to." So he goes and he finds his mother, and he was an identical twin, and she'd kept the other one.
Oh.
I'm sitting in this car, and I said, how did you feel? And he said, well, I had a better life than he did.
Well, all of the stories in the book are so powerful. Some of them are really dark, and but it's, in a way, you almost feel, does anyone have a functional family anymore?
Well, I just gave a speech about that. I think we are women of a certain age, and we have sacrificed some of our, I don't know if I want to use femininity, but because of feminism's strong hold on all of us, I think we kind of went over the edge, and we've got to come back a bit. The families are dysfunctional now. There's not that unity that we've had so much. I mean, there's still some that work, but.
I wonder if with the prevalence of more fathers becoming more active parents, whether the focus on the mother, the psychological focus on the mother will change and shift. How do our relationships as adults evolve from our childhood relationship with our mothers?
Well, I think the important thing to remember as an adult is that you have power and control. Your mother, when you were little, did, there's no question, or whatever your mothering figure was. And I think it's very important to say that, mothering figure. But we forget that when we grow up, that we have the ability to control the situation and to change it. I'm not a great believer in a lot of change. I think that your mother, even if she's dead, still lives inside of you. She may be a compilation of different kinds of figures, but there is a mother who, you know, the one who says, don't eat that chocolate. You know? But we can get to know the mother of today. I mean, we're living a long time, and our mothers aren't going to die at 62 or even 72 like they used to. And my mother died when I was very young, unfortunately, but you know, Candice, I might not have liked her if she were 100. I don't know.
It puts an already complicated relationship to the test. We're going to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Exhale. I'm Candice Bergen, and I'm talking with Alice Faye Cleese about mothers. You were just talking about how we carry our mothers inside us. Talk about your mother, who you lost when you were 16.
Yes, I had a wonderful mother, and really partly I wrote this book as a love song for her. But she did die very young, and it's important, as I said, you have this mother who lives inside of you. And I don't think about her very often. I mean, she's been dead 40 years, you know. But when I met my husband, John Cleese, I'd had not an easy life, lots of trauma. And I never thought I would meet someone as an older woman who was so wonderful. And I had this dream, which was so powerful. And I'm driving on a motorway, or what's it called? I'm American. Highway. And my mother and I are fighting, which we never did because she was ill when I was young and I was afraid I didn't want to upset her. And we're having a real row. And she sort of says, well, pull over into the petrol station, you know, and stop. So we pull up to the pumps, and there's this gas attendant there, and it's John, and he fills my car up. And that's how I felt, that I had been so bereft of my mother, and I was very angry with her for dying. I needed her. And he had given me back something that I needed. Oh. Sorry. It's a hard story to tell.
Yes, it is. And you lost her at a very vulnerable age, when you
were
an adolescent.
But I didn't realize I was cross with her. I think I realized that when my own sons, who are grown now and I have grandchildren, when I looked at one of them one day and I thought, my gosh, you know, he is older than what I was when my mother died. And I was just gobsmacked, you know.
I think we're sometimes surprised when someone who has a background in therapy has any issues left to deal with.
Oh, I've got them.
I
They're right here.
It's very reassuring. I thought it was also the chapter on mother substitutes in the book was very interesting, because a lot of people, if they didn't have to raise themselves, had to find surrogates to be raised by, nannies or housekeepers or aunts.
Well, it's almost like, you know, the Oscar Wilde thing, the love that may not speak its name. because a lot of these children had a mother present, but not being, quote, mother. And there may have been a maid, or one of my friends had a butler. There may have been a surrogate father, parent, uncle, and these were their mothers. And they raised these children. But you were almost punished for loving that other mother. And that makes it very difficult. I know I had other mother. I lived in the South, and I had Henrietta, who lived with us till my father died. She's the one who taught me to iron, as all good Southern girls do, and all those things.
There's also a chapter called Red Hot Mamas. Is there anything as disturbing to children as the fact that their parents may have had a sex life at some point in their past?
Listen, I just did these satellite things, you know, where you do 30 radio interviews, 5 minutes each, and the men are the best. They would say, no, my mother only had sex twice, you know, me and my brother. I go, what? I don't know why we find it so uncomfortable. My PA is going to kill me, but he's a wonderful guy, and he's gay, and he's the youngest of 8 children, and he wanted to tell his mother that he had a partner whom he's been with for years, but found it very difficult. And he actually gave her my book, and he tells about it in there. And he used his father's name, so it wasn't like he used a pseudonym. Anyway, she said to him, well, there's a pub for boys that you and Bergen might enjoy, because she'd met him. This all went very well, and he and I are sitting there talking, and I said, you know, your mom's 76 and your father's dead. Wouldn't it be great if she could find someone and enjoy the last part of her life, because she's very healthy? And he said, absolutely not. He said, my mother can't have sex again. I mean, it was just, and I said, Gary, she has been so understanding, you know, so good about your choice of love and life. And he said, nope.
That's where I draw the line. Is the expression, I'm becoming my mother, or I don't know, you probably read Nancy Friday's book, My Mother, Myself. It seems to strike terror into most women's, or almost everyone's hearts. Is it a reason to panic, or a reason to feel that we've matured?
I think it's really important to look at that and reflect upon it. And, you know, you're like a jigsaw puzzle. And if you don't look at yourself in the relationship you have or had with your mother, you're missing a piece. And we all say that, you know, I'm not going to repeat that pattern. But you will unconsciously if you don't think about it. Now, the difference is if you really evaluate your personality traits and patterns that you had that you didn't care for about your mother, you may find that you're using them in a very positive way, and actually taking the personality trait that you didn't like and using it differently and better. And if she's still alive, it would be fascinating, I think, to sit down and talk about that. John's mother's a great example for that, because she's 100. She spanned 3 centuries. And he didn't like some of the personality traits he had of hers, but in fact he's put them to good use. And he now can talk with her about it.
Can we expect to have successful relationships in our lives if we have not come to terms with our relationship with our mother?
I think that you have a better chance if you can make some reparation and try to understand your mother. Now, everyone says, oh, well, you can talk about it, big deal. It's a very hard thing to do, and yes, it is. I think the important thing is, you know, she sewed all your buttons on, Candice, and you don't have to choose to unbutton.
Mine didn't. But
yeah, well, you don't have to choose to unbutton this. But if you are going to talk to your mother, and I don't normally give advice, but this is, in a sense, advice, don't go back to the kitchen table. You know, don't go back home where all of your issues are. And don't do it over the telephone, because it's too complicated. But find a neutral place. I mean, you can go on a holiday or go to lunch somewhere, or try to find a place that's more neutral so that things don't get quite as heated. And listen to her, which is very hard to do.
I also like that you said, remember your mother's age. The list of 10 pointers that you have at the end of the book are so clear. It's great to be given a sort of how-to.
Well, it came out of the research. It's very nice for me to say I wrote this book, but the people that I loved and interviewed her really wrote the book. I just put it down on paper.
Because themes reveal themselves.
I mean, like even the things I wrote about, like the chapter title, like Red Hot Mamas, or the cultural issue, that came out of the interviews. I didn't sit down and, you know, intelligently write down those things. They just came about through the research.
Why did you set the book up the way you did?
I guess, let me just start with the cultural issue, because that probably was the clearest from the beginning. I was amazed, and don't forget that I am American, but I lived in England, so I was traveling all over the place. And the number of immigrant mothers who had first generation, you know, children was quite amazing. And there are absolute different issues. There's no question of that. And don't forget, I'm an immigrant. I mean, I moved to England, and my children grew up with an immigrant mother, and I was different than their schoolmates. Then there was, unfortunately, the cruel mothers, really evil mothers. And what's interesting about that is I have specialized in adolescent boy criminals for a great deal of time. And even they still love their mothers.
Well, the example in the book of, I think it was Allison from New Jersey, who continually revisited her mother as she was dying in the hospital, who had done such horrible things to her because she said, I wanted her to love me. People...
No, they live in hope, but they want their mother to change. And their mother probably won't. So one of the most touching stories to me was John Goldwyn's, when his mother was dying and she says, I respect you.
He finally summons up the courage to say, I love you very much, and her response is, I respect you.
He said, but you don't understand. At least she gave me something. And maybe that's all you're going to get, is just something.
I'm getting copies for friends. We're going to take a break, but don't budge, because when we come back, we'll be joined by Alice Cleese's husband, Mr. John Cleese. Welcome back to Exhale. I'm Candice Bergen, and I've been talking with Alice Faye Cleese. Joining us now is her husband, John Cleese. John, as you know, is a founding member of the legendary comedy troupe Monty Python, a brilliant actor and a brilliant writer in film and television, you know, and the co-author of 2 best-selling books on mental health. And he has a mom. And we're all wrestling for most of our time with these issues. So you were an interview subject in your wife's book.
This is right. In the English version, I actually appeared. My family name was Cheese. I don't know if you know that. So my dad changed it in 1915, quite seriously, when he went in the First World War. So in the English edition, I actually appear as Jack Wensleydale, which is a strange Yorkshire cheese. But, in the American edition, I came clean.
Oh, gee, it's a shame to lose that, although Americans wouldn't have gotten it unless you were John Velveeta or something. I have a question here. Have you thought much about your relationship with your mother? I don't know why I think you have.
I guess it's crossed my mind over the centuries, yeah. She's an interesting woman. She has a lot of Alice's qualities. I mean, she's busy, and she loves to chat, right?
And she's funny.
And she's funny. She has a wonderful black sense of humor, which is really how we communicate, because I don't think we've ever had great empathy.
No, even as sensitively as it's been handled in the book, empathy seems to be the elephant not in the room.
Well, can I tell a quick story? I mean, for example,
I hope it's the little man from Fulham.
Oh, yes, I can tell you that one.
Tell
this
me
is how
any
I
story
really
you
communicate. And it's through humor, really, that we have these moments of contact, which are very valuable. I mean, we all know that. And it must be terrible not to have them at all, but I have had a few. And when she complains, because it's very sad as you get older, because your friends die. I mean, this is not very nice. And she sometimes
and her card-playing partners, yeah.
That's right. And they're keeling over left, right, and center. And
well, if you're 100.
At 100. And she used to say to me sometimes, I don't really know why I want to go on living. And when she got like that, I didn't know what I could really do to help except listen. And that helps a little bit. But one day, I just guess intuitively, I said, well, look, when you've had enough, let me know, and I will ask, there's a little man I know down in Fulham in southwest London, and I'll ring him up and he will come down and kill you. And there's this moment of astonishment, and then she cackles with laughter. So every time after that she started to say life wasn't too good, I said, well, shall I call the man in Fulham? And she would say, no, not this weekend. So it became a joke, and it was a way of changing her mood.
Yeah, that's what you have to do, is try to find a way to change your mother's mood or how you think about her, and then she'll think about you different. You know, people always say, oh, John's so different now that you and he are together. He's not, but if you dwell on the more positive personality traits and say to the negative ones, you know, you just sit there and be real quiet. You know? Well, then
she's helped me to break the pattern, you see. I think it's terribly hard to break the pattern, but what she was able to do was to help me stand up to Mother, because Mother was very good at kind of manipulating me by getting upset if she didn't get exactly what she wanted.
Oh, temper tantrums would come.
Yeah, that's more or less. And Alice was able to stand up to her, and when I actually saw that you could stand up to her and the ceiling didn't fall in, then it was kind of easier for me to do that.
And there seems also to be the point where we mother our own mothers, which is a rite of passage.
Well,
I started that at about 18 months. She managed to sort of flip that responsibility around quite early on, and I think that's why, for example, I've never ever wanted power. Because to me, power only means responsibility.
You had it so young.
Yes, that's right. I don't know.
Has your mom gotten over your decision to go into show business rather than follow your career in the law?
I think she really wanted me to be a school teacher in the town in which she lived. And it's Alice pointed out to me that of all the films I've made, the one she likes best is the one where I play a schoolmaster.
Clockwise, so it's her favorite film. But also, she's very different when she's not with John. But when he comes into the room, and this is true with a lot of adult children and their mothers, then the power structure changes, and she...
And we both become different people.
That's right. He does.
Yeah.
He has short pants on.
Yeah.
You know how the English wear those little short trousers?
You know, I think one of the best metaphors was Mike Nichols and Elaine May's sketch on his playing a sort of Werner von Braun type, calling his mother and being reduced to a sort of babbling infant by the end of the call. I suppose it's helpful if you can convert it into humor. Do you think, since I have you both here, do you think humor is learned or inherited, or both?
I think that my humor certainly came from my parents, because my dad had a quite different sense of humor. His was more whimsical and witty, whereas Mother had this really quite black sense of humor. And I have both of those kind of humors. I mean, my father did very strange, unpredictable things. If he got slow service in a restaurant, he would say, could you hurry up the meal because I have an operation to perform in an hour and a quarter. And he did little things like that, which always surprised me, because he was so straight otherwise. You know? So I don't know, I'm not so sure, because Alice and I have an area of misunderstanding, because as you know, in Oklahoma, where Alice Faye grew up, irony is now a doctorate. And it's not something that's taught at Mother's breast.
Well, it kind of things go over my head. But certainly Barry Brazelton from Boston did a research study on babies. Certain infants do come sort of with better or sunnier, more seductive dispositions. But obviously, the nurturing thing has to be there to, I mean, I grew up with a mob of boy cousins, and I was the only girl, and they really just, you know, persecuted me. But I have a great sense of humor when I'm a mate, because I learned how to do that. But the irony still doesn't come.
Yes, this is true. We would.
It's not an American strong suit.
Well, it depends what part of America you are, Candy. I mean, if you're on the coasts, then it's exactly like being in Britain, except the British cannot be anything other than ironic. They can never actually say anything direct and really emotionally honest, in my experience.
How did you become such an advocate of therapy in a country that was so remote?
Well, I kind of stuck my neck out. I had a very good experience working with this guy, Robin Skinner. I thought
he was one of my idols.
Yes, he's a very special man, and I arrived in his group with a good formal education, supposed to be anyway, in a public school in Cambridge, and I realized that the difficulties that I was having in that first marriage of mine, I had no idea what to do about it. I was clueless, you know, I didn't have 101 in anything that I needed to know. And he taught me a great deal, and early on, about 6 weeks in, I was kind of arguing things with him, and I suddenly thought, shut up. This guy knows something that you don't know. And I kind of sat and listened a lot. And at the end of it, I met Robin after I'd been in the group about a year later, and I suggested we did a book together, because I said there's so many people out there who need this information who don't really need therapy. And that's how they came about.
And I don't think most people take on board. In London, it is the center of psychoanalysis. I mean, because of the war, so many of the people were Jewish who had trained with Freud. They all escaped to London. I mean, like I trained under Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter, and it's all there. But the English are, as John said, so stiff. And the public school system there, especially for the old boys, teaches them not to show any emotion.
So when I did the book, I felt that it was necessary for me to stick my neck out and actually say, yes, I've had therapy and I think I benefited from it. And some people, I think, genuinely liked that and respected it, but there was also the sort of slightly snotty upper middle class attitude.
Not in England.
Do we really have to talk about things like this, you know, when we could be discussing Nigerian foreign policy?
Have you found the British public reluctant to accept you as in such a serious vein?
I think they find it very hard. I'm not so sure if it's really the public. I think it's more the media. The media, I find, in England, are very cliche-minded. And the whole idea that you do two things instead of one is something they find it very hard to get their mind around. And when we originally had these books out, you'd find them also put in the humor section of bookshops. People just couldn't quite get the idea that you might have two separate interests.
Well, it's sort of
gradually it's got accepted much more, and there's now a lot more self-help books, but there's still a greater tendency to sneer about it all and talk about psychobabble. You know?
Also, it's hard to write a very simple book about such a complicated subject. And in England or here, if you don't read the book or read the material in a caring and thoughtful way, you can say, oh, well, it's simple. You know, there's no terms or no explanation. And of course, that's the whole point, is to help. I don't want to help my psychoanalytic colleagues. I want to help Joe Blow from Kalamazoo.
You know, proven by the fact that a book that's a self-help book manages to be so moving and
well,
so
that's
revealing.
what changes us. You know, what changes us is an experience or a book where somehow we feel something. We don't change because somebody gives us extra information. And if you're in a culture like Britain that is the sort of educated people are too keen on intellectual intelligence without really understanding the importance of emotional intelligence. And they think they need sort of complicated ideas. That's not what affects us. What affects us is one emotional experience, and that will change us. Only a tiny bit, but that's the start of a change.
My book came out in England, and it was a bestseller, and I have the most amazing letters, like from journalists or from people saying, you know, I really started to think differently. I guess that's the thing that gave me so much pleasure for myself.
Very hard to make an inroad with the English public, so you should congratulate yourself.
I think the vast majority of the English now are much more open to this kind of thinking.
Are they?
And if you find an editor of a very middle-of-the-road paper said to me in connection with publicizing the second book, when I said, well, don't you want the stuff on politics or the stuff on religion or the stuff on schools? And he said, no, our readers are really only interested in self-help. And this is the most successful middle-of-the-road paper, the Daily Mail in England.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, but it's the upper middle class who tend still to set the tone, the chattering classes. They still have not quite got it.
We're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Hi, welcome back to Exhale. I'm Candice Bergen. I'm talking with John and Alice Faye Cleese. John, you're starting your tenure as professor at large at Cornell.
Oh yes, I love that. They
Oh,
call
yeah,
me
I want to hear about
professor.
that.
Isn't that lovely?
You're giving a lecture on W.C. Fields in October. Can I audit?
I think I'm going to do that in the spring, and it's because I think he's the greatest comedian you guys ever produced. A man whose every remark, every joke is kind of more profound than most of the jokes that are made. I mean, I'll give you a simple example. His biographer, a guy called Taylor, was visiting him in his last days. You know, I mean, he really had a few days left. He was in a sanatorium. And Taylor walked in, knocked on the door, walked in one day, and there was Bill Fields sitting at a desk, hat on his head, in his pajamas, reading the Bible. And Taylor said, "Bill, you reading the Bible?" And Fields looked up and said, "Looking for loopholes." No, that's a staggering joke, because it's not just funny, but it's, you know, there's so much meaning in that. I think he's the greatest comedian, but he was politically incorrect. And I wonder that's why...
He hasn't been revived?
Yeah, or has been kind of forgotten. So
yeah.
I want to revive him, and I happen to know a guy who's writing his biography. I had dinner with him about 3 weeks ago, and he's going to come up and talk to the students still. So I think we could get something very interesting going there. He mustn't be forgotten.
Will these lectures you give be filmed, I hope to God?
I suppose it will, yeah, provided they're taped and we can edit them, because
Yeah.
anytime you're talking to an audience, some of it's good and some of it's not so
And
good.
it's also a real teaching. It's not just him giving a lecture. He's got students there, and it's a dialogue.
Am I right that it's a 6-year period?
Yeah, it's 6 years, which is great. So
Yeah.
when I'm busy, I don't have to go there, and then I can go there quite a lot. And as I'm getting less busy, I want to spend more time. And it's kind of, because it's marvelous. There's something you want to sound off about. You can just say, "I'd like to do a lecture on that," and they get you the whole. You know?
He's got a bit pompous, I must say.
Well, yes, but then I am British. I'm working on it.
Well, I would think you could also do that in an editorial any place if you wanted to.
I get some buzz out of talking to younger people. I love to sense that I'm still in communication with them. Because as a comic, I think I've lost communication with them now. I think I don't laugh at the same things that that they laugh at. But
What do you think the difference is?
I don't know. I think my interests are simply different. You can't at 60 expect to be interested and want to make jokes about things that people at 22 want to talk about.
Yeah, but great comedy is eternal in a sense. What do you think about who's out there today?
I don't find that I'm very encouraged by what I see, and this has been a long-term trend. I mean, just before I wrote Fish Called Wanda, I was depressed at several of the comedies that had been big successes. And then I saw Tin Men and Roxanne in about 5 weeks, both of them fabulous, witty, clever films. And it totally filled me with, yeah, I want to do that, because a really classy film can work. But when I look at a lot of the stuff now, it breaks the rules that I personally worked out for myself that I feel are about what great comedy is. And also as an actor, I don't get sent a great deal that's funny. I don't know about you.
You have to go to television, good television,
Yes,
for that.
yes,
You don't find it in features.
Yeah.
What rules would those be that you found for yourself for great comedy?
Well, about believability, I think really you must, the film must find a level of reality, and then that tone has really got to be maintained throughout the movie. And I constantly see movies now with very funny sequences, like something about Mary, but then there's all bits round that I don't believe. And when you get one that's beautifully knitted together, where you just believe it from beginning to end, and there's funny stuff, then they seem to be able to do that about once every 8 years. But I always claim comedy's so much harder than drama anyway.
Yes, especially to make it believable, and in your case, simultaneously moving often. So you guys, this is a relationship that fascinates me, and of course, I have my own idea about your next book, which would be together about marriage later in life.
I think we've got too much to learn about that.
Yeah.
Well, there is the shooting in the foot aspect of taking that on, but you met on a blind date fixed up by your therapist, right,
Well,
John?
my doctor.
Your doctor.
Yeah, somebody
well,
reported
that's
it was my therapist. No, he basically prescribed Alice Faye. He knew her, he knew her quite well, and I think he disapproved of my choice.
I think that should be done more often, people prescribing mates who have some kind of wisdom. In
well,
that
they
area.
often see what's going to fit you better, and I think if you grow up in a culture as we do, where romantic love is taken as a serious basis for relationships, you're in trouble to start with.
So did it take immediately?
It was very funny because I'd been single for almost 20 years. I had been cured by my first marriage, I thought. And obviously I dated a lot, but Johnny, the doctor, sent my patients to me. And he said, oh, I want to fix you up with a blind date. And I said, well, you know, I'll come if it's a dinner party for 10 or 8. And then if I don't like him, you know, I'll talk to him. And I said, well, who is it? And he said, it was John Cleese. And I'd never seen John in anything. But his
It's amazing,
book,
living in London for 20
Well, I don't
years.
watch telly. Anyway, but
He's in films?
well, I don't know. He's not the kind of films Monty Python would have kind of gone over my head. I don't know. I mean, I go to serious things.
This must have been a relief to you in a way, John, wasn't it?
It's very
To
strange,
not have that
but I'll tell you
baggage.
something odd. If I look back over a lot of my relationships, the serious ones usually started with people having no idea who I was or what I did. Isn't that strange?
No, perfectly logical.
But
I
it was
think.
over the bread rolls, really. I collect brains. I mean, I had a very poor early education, and I just love to be around intelligence. And so I have my own walking, you know, encyclopedia and
guess.
intellectual brain.
And not just walking in
No.
any way either, but strangely walking.
Better since the hip was replaced, though.
Oh gosh, tell them about your mum and
Yeah,
the hip.
Oh, that's a funny story. So I've had an arthritic hip, and on June the 11th last year, it was about to be replaced. So I went down to see Mum. I said, it's going to be fine. I'm going to hospital. I have my hip replaced. On June the 8th, 3 days before she fell out of bed, broke her hip.
Same hip.
Same hip.
When I told my therapist laughed for 2 minutes. She said she just didn't want you to have the attention.
Couldn't bear it.
She must have been 99 then.
She was 99.
But you know what was interesting about that? It also gave them something that was very interesting for them to talk about. And she became...
Rehab.
Yeah. And she was ahead of him. So, of course, the competition was great because she could say, well, I did so-and-so today and you haven't done that yet, you know.
That's right. It's really remarkable. I'm very grateful she has lived to 100 because there's been a lot that we have been able to resolve. A lot of it really through knowing some of the techniques that Alice is talking about, this business of getting a little distance on it, and above all, of seeing that she really is so different. This person with you now is so different from the mother, you know, when you were young.
But you also learned some things from her. One of the things I talk about is other mothers. And I could never figure out where John got such a great quality and ability to love. And we were talking to Granny on her 99th birthday, wasn't it? And we were talking about baby steps, you know, when you take your first step. And she said, oh, well, you did that with Lizzie. And we said, who? Come to find out, she'd had her mother's maid because it was during the war, and they had left the city to live down in the country. And she'd taken her mother's maid, and in fact, she was the one who looked after John. So that was the mother, the good mother.
I also got a lot of mothering from my father. You mentioned earlier the idea that if you miss out on an experience, then you can go back and pick it up later. And it's the biggest lesson I learned from writing all those books with Robin Skinner is if you can only admit what you need to go back and learn, you can always go back and learn it. But admitting it always makes you feel, you know, a bit naive because you sort of feel, I ought to know this by now.
But don't you feel we also reinvent our mothering through mothering our children? That in sort of redoing it the way one wished it might have been done, that you can kind of put things back together or make
Or you can go over the
things.
top and go too much the other direction. I mean, I was a single parent and I made a lot of mistakes. I could only be a good enough mother. That's a Winnicott said that. That's all I was able to do. And if that wasn't enough, then I feel very sorry for my children, but they are adults and they can make some reparation all by themselves. They can go and get those things that I couldn't give them.
At what point do we take responsibility for who we are and stop blaming our moms?
About 3 years after we go into therapy. People think that therapy is a kind of a cop-out. It's actually the opposite. What people learn from therapy is much more the ability to take responsibility for themselves. In the early stages of therapy, as they examine the relationships between, particularly
but-
mother and father, they do a lot of blaming, but then you have to move on from
Yeah,
that.
but they mustn't lose their sense of humor. You can't have a sense of humor failure if you're going to change. You know, laughter is so close to tears, and it's just so much better to laugh at yourself and your mother. And
In any respect.
Yeah. It's
we have
about
to take
perspective.
Yes. We have to take a break. Don't go anywhere. Hello, welcome back to Exhale. I'm Candice Bergen, and I'm talking with John and Alice Faye Cleese. One question about Monty Python. We've all heard, and I haven't seen the video, but Graham Chapman's, was it a service at the Aspen Comedy Festival?
It was a memorial service.
It was a memorial
yes,
service.
That's right. The funeral was literally about 3 family members, and then we had this wonderful occasion at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, which is where he trained as a doctor. And I had to give the opening talk, and of course I thought, well, you see, Graham hated anyone being correct. I mean, even being marginally polite was fairly offensive as far as he was concerned. But he was on my shoulder on that day, so I was able to say these dreadful things about what a freeloading bastard he was. And I knew he would have loved it. I knew he would have approved, whereas had I been respectful and courteous and so forth, he would have reviled me up there.
Didn't you launch out by saying good riddance to bad rubbish?
That's right. That's right.
But you know, the other thing that was so moving about that service is the pythons when they're the pythons when they're together play off of each other. They're like a shark. They're like a feeding frenzy, and it just got more and more moving.
Got funnier and funnier.
And then it became.
Because I started using foul language, because I would have felt I would have let Graham down if I hadn't said it. And it was extraordinary. We had dinner together a few months ago. In London, and we simply said afterwards, we never laugh as much as we do when we're together. So that's kind of nice.
Just tell us about this BBC documentary, which sounds fascinating, about the human face.
Well, the BBC asked me if I'd like to do a series of documentaries about the human face, and I thought it would be such an interesting thing to study. I mean, we're looking about the evolution of the face. When the face starts, you know, when it started to evolve with the mouth. You always think it must have started with the eyes. It actually started with the mouth, because the most important thing is to be able to eat, otherwise you die. You know, that's kind of interesting. I never thought of that before. And then it's the face's identity, and then what is beauty? Might come and interview you about that. And then about communication, you know, how we use it to communicate emotion. And it gets very interesting.
Well, and it's also about the mother and the baby, you know, and what happens there, because
babies after 20 minutes, the only thing they're interested in looking at is a face. If you draw one of those little faces, you know, dot, and they will, after 20 minutes, that's the thing they look at.
And also, they can sense what that face is saying to them. If a mother is distant or depressed, or the baby somehow can sense that.
I meant that about beauty, because you see, what's so interesting is to talk to someone who's beautiful and say, well, what is it really like? How much does it help? What are the pressures? You know, what's good about it? What's bad about it? It's like fame. Everyone just takes it for granted, and yet really to examine it, it starts getting seriously interesting.
And like, when does a child know that it's ugly or beautiful?
You know, and so many good-looking people rely on the looks and don't do anything else to develop their various talents. And then, of course, when they start aging, it's terrifying because they don't have anything else. And yet that's because in society we reward people who look good. I mean, there's so much research now showing that, you know, if 2 guys are competing for the job, the taller, better-looking one is likely to get it if the other qualifications are the same.
Will this be coming to PBS?
I think it's going to be on Discovery or something like that. They've done a deal with the BBC. But you see, the nice thing is the BBC will still do programs like that. And I have to say, I don't usually discuss my charitable activities, you know, but this is something I was telling Alice on the way down in the car. It's going to take me about 6 or 7 months, and the pay for it is what I get for 2 days on a movie.
Oh, it'll set you back.
Yes, we'll have to get another mortgage. But the great thing is, somebody like the BBC will do a program like this in a way that you couldn't really hope to get it onto television in any other way.
No, you just have to see your participation as subsidizing public television.
I hope to get a commercial.
Yes. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to say goodnight. Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for being here. It's been great having a guest on my couch for an hour, and you both owe me about $200. Thank you.
That's cheap.
Inflation. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been a joy. And don't forget to visit us at Oxygen Online. And thank you for watching Schwanda, a fish called Schwanda. Good night.